Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to our RISE training for the administration of the RISE Summative Assessments. I'm Elise Fry, the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. I'm joined today by a few colleagues from USBE as well as some representatives from CAI, our vendor for RISE. They will be offering support by monitoring the chat as well as responding to other items as needed. Just as a heads up for you, this training is being recorded and will be posted to our assessment YouTube channel in the next few days. I am hopeful that I will be able to share the recording link with you in next week's AD meeting and then the following AD memo as well. Okay, I will also be working with Emily Ng, our support specialist, to share the slide deck with you through Midas where you registered. If you aren't familiar with my trainings, I do build in question moments as we transition between topics, but you're welcome to drop questions into the chat as well at any time and we can address them as they come in. But just know that every few slides or when we switch topics, there will be moments built in for you to drop those into the chat and we can address those. Okay. Today, we're going to be looking in depth at the RISE system, and this includes the portal, its resources, how to administer summative tests, as well as the test appeals process and data cleanup, which as LEA users, you have a responsibility to take care of. We will also be reviewing remote administration guidance for those students who are receiving all of their instruction in a remote setting and have also elected to then take their tests in a remote setting. Hopefully by the end of today's training, you feel confident to train other users in your LEA and provide support as needed for them. Here's a reminder for the availability of the benchmark modules and interim assessments. They're currently open and will remain open through the dates listed. All interim assessments must be completed and submitted by the end of the day, though, on February 28th. Expired interim assessments cannot be reopened after this date, and no interim assessments are available after this date. The benchmarks remain available through the end of your school year for most, if not all of you. And as a note here, the writing benchmarks will be made available for use starting February 18th, and the ELA interim will return next school year. So just kind of be prepared for that. Mid-year summative tests are well underway, if not already completed. Any incomplete mid-year summative tests are going to force complete if they aren't submitted by students on or before March 1st. For spring summative tests, LEAs have 8 weeks within this, the window to complete testing. We do not recommend testing that last week of school as there's lots of activities, interruptions, and those unintended circumstances that happen with scheduling. So please just take that into consideration. You will need to have USBE approval to test your last week of school if that ends up happening, and you can either email myself or Sydney McCarty, our Director of Assessment, if that need arises. I've also included a link to the AD resource guide if you need more guidance on test setting for your windows, okay? You should already be registered for portal updates, but if not, you'll want to do that so that you receive immediate updates for outages, updates to resources, anything that would come like that through the portal. Just make sure that you subscribe for those updates. It just makes your life a little bit easier when you have that immediate response when something changes. The secure browser is required to be installed on all student devices for administering summative assessments. Instructions for installation are in the technology resources link found under the initial resources section of the RISE portal. We're actually going to look at resources more closely here in a little bit. Make sure that you refer to the supported browsers as well before updating any system. There are troubleshooting guides for various operating systems in the tech resources provided on the RISE portal as well. But if you have issues with the secure browser on a device, you'll actually want to reach out to your technology specialist. We also recommend not using the auto update option for devices, as that doesn't always ensure the operating system can be supported. When it comes to preparing for summative administration, we recommend working with students to complete a training test in each of the content areas that they're going to be expected to test. Some ask, what's the difference between a training test and the benchmark module? Training tests are hands down the very best way to familiarize students and ourselves with the actual functionality of the system. It gives you exposure to different item types, the administration procedures, as well as the global tools. It allows you to also ensure local technology configurations are validated to ensure that the summative assessment can actually be administered without issue. It's also important to note, though, that with these training tests, they are grade banded. So the same questions are used for grades 3 through 5 and then 6 through 8. And because of this, they are certainly not intended to show proficiency toward a standard. They're not to necessarily receive a score, okay? It's to help students build capacity and knowledge, familiarity with the system itself. With the training tests, students can familiarize themselves with all of the global tools in a really low stakes environment. It's good to give training tests also, again, in all presented content areas, because some components are more content specific. Think like the calculator or the lack thereof. Okay. In fact, when it comes to remote testing, we're actually asking you to complete a training test just prior to your actual summative administration, because it will allow you one or more chances to ensure teachers and students, as well as their devices, are ready to go. With remote testing, it's also important to provide you with one more opportunity to just test and work with those communication tools built within the system with your students prior to beginning your summative test session. Training tests are provided on the RIDUS portal. They don't require RISE login credentials, but I do recommend practicing a training test with the credentials, so students, especially your younger students, those third and fourth graders, get the feel for the process. Here you can see the two different types of training tests. The training test option is the public guest login option. It's very simple. It doesn't require a proctor or a sign-in. This is great for teachers and staff to familiarize themselves with the platform and how it functions and what it looks like, especially if they're new, or maybe if they don't work in a tested content area, but they're going to be expected to help proctor. It can also be used as an informative tool for parents if there's any questions about what things look like. The test administration option allows you to administer a training test in a test session to mirror the RISE process, which will require SSID login credentials. It will require a valid session ID as well as the secure browser. These are far more useful when prepping for test administration because it better mirrors the RISE summative process. If you've been taking advantage of the interim assessments or the benchmark modules, you've also been able to practice this login process as well through those avenues. This is required for any student completing the RISE assessments remotely, as it will also allow you to practice, again, those communication tools that are built in within the system that we will actually get to look at. Once you've accessed your training test, you'll need to select your grade level as well as the content of the training test you wish to take. Again, note these are banded. The content is not single grade specific. Okay, the purpose is to become familiar with the system itself and the tools it provides. It's important to help students and teachers understand that content mastery is not the purpose of the training test, so that's not what we focus on here. Also, if you're using the system to mirror summative administration, you're going to be able to verify accommodations and ensure that resources are applied and working correctly. This is especially important for students using Braille. Training tests are also provided with Spanish adaptive functionality in the math and science content areas. Guidance for how to access this functionality is provided in the TAM. When the functionality is selected on the training test, students are then going to be able to toggle the content on the test presented in Spanish and English using the Change Languages tool. It is provided in the upper right-hand corner with all of the other tools, so they'll be able to use that. Okay. With that, are there questions on RISE availability, any of the benchmarks, interim summatives, their availability windows, training tests, or the secure browser itself? Okay, we're good then. Okay, if something comes up, drop it in the chat and I'm happy to address it. We're going to look at the other resources in the RISE portal and the other resources that are there throughout the portal itself. Here's a quick overview of each of those separate sections. You'll see there's 5 different tabs to choose from, along with an abbreviated version of what you'll find or be able to do in each of those sections. We will not be looking at the benchmark module preview tab today as we're focusing on the summative administration specifically. But if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, you can actually refer to the benchmark and interim administration training that was held back in August. It's already posted on the portal, and I go into a lot more in depth with that benchmark module previewing tab on that particular training. We're going to start at the top with the resources. The resources tab houses the tech resources previously mentioned, as well as other helpful user guides like the TIDE user guide, the TAM, as well as the RISE reporting guide. All three of these documents are helpful to use before, during, and then after testing. While they're available online, you can print certain sections if you desire to, but know that these are more organic documents and changes can happen at any time. So relying on the copy that you printed maybe at the beginning of the year or the year before isn't going to house the most current information come summative administration time, okay? I see a question in the chat. If our last day of school is May 30th, when is the last day to complete testing? I need some clarification. I'm just hearing different things and I got on this meeting late. So in the state's window, you have 8 weeks that don't use your last week of school, Alicia. So since you finish on May 30th, you want to be able to have your testing completed by May 23rd. Does that help? Okay, perfect. To find those 3 helpful documents, the TIDE user guide, the reporting guide, and the TAM, you're just going to select the user guide folder that's under Browse. Here is a TIDE user guide overview. The TIDE user guide is really helpful before testing, as it's where you will learn how to edit or modify any of the user accounts, as well as user-defined rosters. As a friendly reminder, no change can be made to a system-defined roster because those are automatically created with the Utrecht sync. However, you can create your own rosters for teachers who may be in a co-teaching experience because the students are only going to roster to the one teacher they're originally assigned to. Okay. It's also nice if you're collecting data on a small group of students who may not be in the same class so that it's all in one place. Other important information you'll find in the TIDE user guide is guidance on adding accommodations, how to enter participation codes, and the test appeals process. As a reminder, approving test appeals is only available to school administrators or LEA level users, so you'll want to be sure that you watch for those, and we'll review that process later in the training as well. Anyone administering summative tests should read and familiarize themselves with the appropriate sections of the TAM which apply to their user role, especially as reading the TAM scripts verbatim is required for summative tests. Much of the required scripting is embedded within the system now, but not all of it, okay? The TAM is also designed to allow for printing by specific user role. So teachers or proctors don't need to print the whole entire thing, just the specific sections for their responsibilities. And that's even if they choose to. It's always accessible online. The reporting guide helps give direction for interpreting scores, setting up reports, as well as how to print student ISRs when the time comes, because parents need to be notified of their students' scores within 3 weeks of test completion. Now that we've covered the resources, we're going to skip down to TIDE. When you first select the TIDE option, you will be prompted to log in with your credentials. Once you've done that, the landing page looks like this. Okay, and that TIDE homepage reflects the stages of the testing process: preparing, administration, and then after. Note that that after testing section, the blue one, is actually for LEA level users only. So if you're a teacher or a testing coordinator, you'll only see the first orange and green sections. Note the appeals request as well, because we're going to look more closely at these later. But if you have a number other than 0 in that little red circle, you have some appeals to review. So make sure that you're watching for those. The TIDE homepage also houses the waffle menu for navigating to other areas, as well as the secure file center. Permissions for accessing data and viewing other information in TIDE is also determined by your user role. And there are 6 different user roles. They each have different permissions associated with them. Most of you in this training probably have the LEA administrator role. This screenshot from the TIDE user guide gives you an idea of how those permissions break down. You can see those user abbreviations across the top of the table in blue. For example, an LEA administrator can perform tasks that are not necessarily available to a teacher level user. You can also see here that LEA and school administrators are granted more permissions than teachers or proctors. These permissions are also limited to the scope of data access. So a district level user can work with data pertaining to their district, schools, and an individual teacher, while a school level user is only going to be able to work with data pertaining to the school they're assigned or a teacher to their only specific signed rosters. So now looking at the chat, we have to finish within 8 weeks of when our students first started testing. Yes, Karen, you should pick 8 weeks within the state window that fit with your school's calendar. I'm new to teaching in Utah. Do I need to log into RISE to set up my credentials? Rita, your LEA user or school administrator should already have had that done for you, but I am happy to check if you want to send me an email. I can check that for you after we're done with the training. When you need to access secure documents and student data files you have previously exported from Tide or from RISE reporting, you're just going to click on the Secure File Center button in the banner. It's kind of like an email box. It's just secure in that it's enclosed in the RISE portal. And from there, you can download or archive or delete any previously exported files. Now we're going to look at each of these sections individually, and we're going to start with the preparing testing section. Okay, here you can view and edit user accounts as well as new users. Yes, Tori, you will have access to the slides. They will be posted in Midas if you've enrolled in the course after this training. And Mackenzie, you'll need to send me an email. Don't put it in the chat. It's going to get lost. I can drop mine in the chat though, and you can send me an email with your request. Whoops, that didn't go to everyone. Let's see.
I'll do it, Elise.
Thanks, Jess. So in the prepping for test section, that orange section, you can view and edit user accounts as well as add new users if needed. The students dropdown is going to allow you to access and edit student accounts like adding accommodations. Now, in an effort to not have to travel backward through slides, this is where I'm going to go over accommodations. So this is kind of an all call for how to set accommodations for students in the RISE system. So if you're doing some multitasking, tune in, okay? This student dropdown is also where you can upload student settings and create frequency distribution reports, and we're going to go over that in a little bit too. Incidentally, whenever you're accessing student information, the results can be exported to your Secure File Center on that Tide homepage, and it just allows for larger result tables, and they can be exported as Excel files as well as CSV files. This is a demo student record and gives you an idea of what an individual student record might look like. The student information used to search is displayed at the top, and you can view individual settings, including accommodations, by clicking the pencil icon on the left, okay? To set the accommodations for students who need them, you just need to click on that pencil icon, and that's going to take you to the student test settings screen, which we're going to see here in just a minute. Clicking that pencil icon also allows you to see assessments and benchmark modules that the students already participated in, if there are any parental exclusions associated with the student's account, as well as view or set student test settings. This includes the Spanish adaptive option for summative assessments as well. I know it's really small print, but once you click on that pencil icon, you'll note there are separate menus which will expand or condense based on the little plus minus button on the left. If you look at the very top, there are student information and student participation menus as well, and those have been minimized in this screenshot. Those are also on the view on the previous couple of slides. I've chosen to expand the visual assistance tools and the presentation, as well as integration with assistive technology and other accommodations menus, so you can see that this is where you set those. To do so, you just use the series of drop-down menus and toggle switches to make changes necessary for assistance tools, presentation modifications like Braille, ASL, print on request, or any other accommodations that might be outlined in a student's IEP or 504 document. Okay? Accommodations are not uploaded through the Scram or UTrex. They need to be taken care of manually through this section. This is also where you can, again, set the Spanish adaptive feature for students who need that. If you have any questions regarding students with accommodations or the accommodation themselves, feel free to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist who works with RISE, and she would be happy to assist you with any of those requests or questions that you have. Last year, CAI implemented a new export option that pulls the current tests tool settings for your selected students and exports those settings into an Excel sheet that's then pre-formatted to import back to Tide. Okay, this Excel export allows for quicker edits because you can then just re-upload it when changing test settings, and it's accessed from the View, Edit, Export Student Tide task. Note here, though, that this export feature does not take the place of Tide forms, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Users are only able to upload changes to student test settings that are already editable directly in Tide. The ones that we looked at on the previous slide, those are the ones you can do with that. Users can't upload test settings for accommodations which would require state approval through Tide forms. As I mentioned before, this is also where you will be able to apply the Spanish adaptive version of the test. To apply the Spanish adaptive feature, you would select Spanish under math or science or both of those test families and click Save. This functionality is not available for the ELA reading or writing components of the assessment. This isn't going to show up in Tide, but I wanted to bring attention to what it looks like for students when they're in the testing environment. As a reminder, we have developed recommendations for students who we feel would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version of the summative assessment. And it's important to note that the decision ultimately needs to be determined by the LEA's language services team with support of the parent and student preference. Okay, guidance is provided in the TAM. So if you have students who would possibly benefit from this accommodation, please make sure that you are checking the TAM first and ensuring that the guidelines that are set are being met prior to setting this accommodation for the student within the system. The student's menu is also where you can create, again, that frequency distribution report. This report is available at the LEA or the school level, and it's going to show you the number of students in a specific category. Again, once you generate one of these reports, it's going to be sent to that secure file center within the RISE portal. If you have students who require the use of assistive technology or Scribe, you need to make a request to USBE through Tide using the forms functionality. And this is going to alert USBE and then require approval. To do that, you'll click on Forms in that orange section and then click Submit Forms. On the next page, select the type of form that you want to submit. You may select Request Form as applicable to the accommodation being requested. For assistive technology requests, you need to complete the form detailing the demographic information of the school, as well as other detailed requirements that are there for the accommodation. And then all of these sections on this form need to be completed before you submit it. Once you've completed it, you do have to agree that the accommodation is documented, used regularly, as well as with fidelity in the classroom instruction, and has been attempted with training tests to ensure that it functions as expected for the student and with the student. And upon submission, a tracking identifier is going to be provided. It's recommended that you save this little identifier just to easily track the status of your accommodation request. And just know that once you submit it, the request can't be edited or changed once you've hit submit. Okay. The request will then be reviewed by USBE staff, and once it's approved, staff will enable the requested accommodation in Tide. If you have any questions regarding accommodations or these forms and how to submit them, again, you can reach out to Jessica, our special education specialist. Okay. Once you submit those requests, you can also review them. So on the Tide dashboard, you just click on Forms in the Preparing for Testing group and click View, Edit Forms. And then on the next page, that View, Edit Forms search box is going to show up. Any fields that have the little asterisk are going to be required to be filled out. Select and input any of the relevant search information settings based on your previously submitted accommodation form, and then you can click Search. Okay. The status of forms matching the selected search criteria are then going to be displayed. This step is optional, but if you want to view further details about the request, you can click on the pencil icon to the left of the applicable form. Okay. Is it available in any other languages besides English and Spanish yet? No, Heather, we only have English and Spanish available currently, but there is guidance in the TAM if you need translation provided in languages other than Spanish. And again, that guidance is in the TAM. Do you know how long it takes to hear back about approval of accommodations? Jessica, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so any accommodations that were submitted before last week have already been approved, so you should be able to review those. If you submitted something this week, I've been out of the office, and I usually take a couple of days, but especially during the summative assessment window. However, and I cannot stress this enough, there are, just dozens and dozens and dozens of last minute requests. Last spring, I had so many assistant principals that were making requests the night before a student takes a test. So your emergency is not my priority. In our TAM, we specified 3 to 4 weeks notice. You really need to stress that to whoever is submitting these accommodations for state approval, that they need to have planning time, because if you submit something to me at 5 p.m. and the student's testing the next day or the day after, it's literally me going in there and doing that. And if I have a meeting the next morning, it's not going to be set. I do say, I understand that emergencies happen. But an emergency is not that you just sent me 25 requests at a time. That's not an emergency. That was lack of planning. So if you do have something that comes up at the last minute, if you could send me an email to just let me know, hey, I'm sorry, I have these last minute accommodations. That way I know that's a priority for me to get those done before the student's engaging in the test.
All right, other questions in the chat. Alicia, should we start putting accommodations now for students? Yes, you can start putting accommodations in. And then, just because I want everyone to be able to see this one, can any multi-language learner take the test in Spanish? The answer is no. There's a specific set of requirements that need to be met. That guidance is provided in the TAM. Off the top of my head, I want to say page 40-ish, but you can find it easily in the table of contents. Just search for translation requirements, and that will be in there. And if you have questions on that, though, feel free to reach out to myself or Sydney McCarty, and we can help you with those questions.
And also, we're referring to English language learners. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning Spanish. So it could be other languages.
Yes. All right, so now we're going to move on to rosters. The roster tab allows you to search pre-existing rosters. You can also create or edit or delete user-defined rosters. And then you can also view the system-defined rosters. Remember that system-defined rosters cannot be edited. Those are the ones loaded through UTREX. If you are experiencing roster issues, please reach out to our assessment data specialist, Maureen Rushing. Just remember, it's important to ensure teachers who are testing have the correct students on the rosters prior to the actual test date. So if the teacher is electing to print testing tickets, they have that accurate set of information. So if you're expecting to see a student on a teacher roster and they're not showing up, reach out to Maureen and she can help you with that, okay? Participation codes is the next dropdown we're going to look at. They are used by USBE for the summative tests. The only exception to this, though, is the parental exclusion participation code, which is also entered for any assessment. Like the benchmark modules can have a parental exclusion code entered as well as interims, okay? All other ones, though, are used for the summative assessment. To update a student's participation codes, search for students using the available filters. The search results table is going to show students who match any of the search criteria that you entered. And the participation codes column lists any assigned participation codes that are already assigned to a student's account. If you need to add a code, you're going to select the edit pencil for the student whose participation code you'd like to update. And then the edit non-participation code page appears. You'll see the student information at the top, and then you can edit those codes using the drop-down menu available for each of the tests that the student is eligible to take. As a note here, if a student doesn't appear on a roster, you might actually want to check the parental exclusion status for that student because the code might hide them from appearing on a roster because they're not eligible to take the test due to that code. So just kind of as a note there. It's also important to note here that the new participation codes are listed. So you can see the accommodation codes with 210, 211, and 212 that were added for this particular administration. With that, we're going to stop here for a minute and see if we have any other burning questions about our RISE resources, rostering, accommodations, or participation codes before we move on to getting into more of the actual testing procedural stuff. If they're opting out of summative testing, do you have to add codes for interim? No, Emery, you don't. You can just add them for the summative tests, especially if you're not administering the interim tests. Any other questions?
Oh, I did just want to say, based on that, when do you going to hear back from accommodations? You're not going to hear back from me. You'll need to check the TIDE system for that. And there is a feature for teachers to also check those state-approved accommodations requests, and that guidance is in the TAM on how they can view those submissions.
Okay, if there are no other questions for rostering and accommodations, we will move into the testing process itself. Before you conduct any testing, I would recommend going through this checklist just to ensure that your bases are covered, okay? If you have any questions regarding the standard test administration and testing ethics policy training, you can reach out to Sydney McCarty, our testing coordinator, our director of testing now. Also, please review the TAM. Make sure that you have your scripts ready to read and ensure that devices that students are going to be using are in working order. So this includes keyboards, computer mice, headphones. I mentioned headphones because with the addition of more embedded scripting, as well as the text-to-speech option that any student can take advantage of, students will want those headphones ready and available before they even enter the testing environment, okay? Again, note that not all of the scripting is embedded. So paying close attention to guidance at the TAM there is still very much required. Print your testing tickets if you plan to use them. Also take into account the classroom or the location environment. We want to make sure that we are eliminating distracting noises. As a note here, please do not play music during standardized assessments. Okay, cover or remove any materials that could provide hints or answers to students. If possible, you may even choose to arrange the room in such a way that prevents students from viewing others' computer screens. You'll also need to notify students of your local electronic device policy prior to administration because no secondary devices are allowed during testing. So those devices could include, but are not limited to, things like a cell phone, smartphone, smartwatches, really any internet capable device is not an allowable thing to have during the testing. The only exception to this is students who may have a device that's monitoring a health situation like insulin. If you have questions regarding students who would require that accommodation, you can also contact Jessica, our special education specialist. Any guidance on the new META glasses? Amy, I'm not sure what those are, so I have no guidance. Okay, perfect. If you have elected to use testing tickets, there's a few places you can access those to print. You can print tickets from the student menu and the roster menu in the prepare for testing section. But the print test tickets option in the green administering test section is actually the very easiest place. Okay. After selecting the print test tickets dropdown, you'll select the print from roster list where you'll be prompted to use the dropdown menus for roster, for the type of roster, the teacher name, and to create the list, okay? From there, you will select the section you wish to print tickets for, and the printer icon is then going to become available. These can be printed one roster name at a time, or you can select all and multiples of the rosters, okay? That print icon, which appears grayed out in the screenshot, is going to illuminate for selection as soon as at least one of the rosters has been selected for printing, okay? And now that we've prepped for testing, we're gonna move to monitoring testing progress, okay? Amy, I'm getting a notice that with it being like smart glasses, they would not be allowed. Anything that could be considered smart technology or is internet capability is not allowable, okay?
Is there any way to tell that they're smart glasses just by looking at them? I've never seen them myself. Or are we kind
Nope.
of just, okay, so
They're
relying on
hard to see. You gotta know what
honest
you're
with
looking
this, is
for.
that what we're saying?
A kid that normally doesn't wear glasses shows up wearing glasses. That's a big hint.
Huh, we'll have to discuss internally some more about
Yeah.
this.
Do a little more investigation there. So there's two different views to be aware of with the administering tests menu section. There's one for admins and one for teachers. And you'll notice the admins have more options, as well as the option to make test appeal requests. And we're going to go over that part later. But the other added components to the admin level view include the test session status report, as well as the test status code report. You will want to actively monitor testing throughout all of your testing windows. Okay. The tasks available in the monitoring test progress task menu allow you to generate various reports that provide information about the test administration's progress. There's the plan and manage testing report, which details a student's test opportunities and then the status of all of those. There's the test completion rates report. We're going to look at that one separately in a minute. And then there's the test status code report, which displays all of the participation codes for a specific test administration. So you can create your own plan and manage testing report with your own specific search criteria. This allows users to generate customizable participation reports to show student progress. There are two different ways to do this. There's the basic search, which this series of slides walks through. You'll need to fill out your LEA and school information specific to your search. More information on how to better utilize this feature is also included in the TIDE user guide. I think it starts on about page 150. There's also the advanced search, and this guidance continues past that. I think it continues on page 151. But by zooming in a bit, you can see it provides you with the option to select by have or have not completed or not completed, paused. You can check ones that are close to being expired. You can also search by SSID or session ID, as well as things within a specific date range. Another participation report is the test completion rate report, and it summarizes the number and percentage of students who have started or completed a test. These items are all columns which appear in this particular report. So there's the test, any LEA information, students, how many have started, how many have completed, and so on. Now we're going to move into the actual test administration. As a reminder, the TAM is located in the resources section, but to open a testing session, you'll need to select the test administration system option. These are the same 6 steps for any RISE test. It doesn't matter if it's summative or benchmark or an interim assessment. If teachers have administered benchmark modules or interim assessments, this won't look too different, okay? 2 proctors for summative are best for test security, okay? They do not need to be certified teachers, but they do need to have gone through the appropriate testing ethics training, all right? For students testing in person, one proctor might be in the classroom with the students, while the other might be roaming amongst other testing areas within the building. For students testing remotely, the 2 proctors need to be in the same physical location. This means they need to be in the very same room for ease of communication. And with RISE, they're actually sharing a device, so they need to be together, okay? Be sure to have any materials ready, so like your testing tickets, headphone scripts, scratch paper, things like that. That way, if it's all ready to go, it provides the least amount of disruption to the actual administration if you've got it done and ready to go beforehand. So now we're going to go through step by step the entire administration process, start to finish. Okay. The first step in administering any test is to create a testing session. This should be done less than 20 minutes prior to starting the test in order to prevent the system from timing out, okay? The list of students in the session is going to generate automatically as the students begin to log on. How far ahead of a testing date can you give the students their testing tickets? Actually, the testing ticket shouldn't go home at all. So if you're testing in person, you give the students the ticket the morning of, like as they're coming into the classroom, and you take it back from them as they are leaving. If you are testing remotely, you are sending them their SSID, the name information, and the session information securely either through an encrypted email or through your LMS system just prior to administration. Okay. Yes, George, the slides will be available in Midas at the end of the training. So when you first log in and select a test type, the test selection window is going to automatically appear so that you can create your sessions. And in our continued effort to prevent the misadministration of summative assessments, this important box is going to appear. It says, you're about to select a summative test. Students have only one opportunity to take this test. Click OK to continue. If you really want to administer this, please type summative. While we had exactly 0 misadministrations of summative assessments last year, thanks to this feature, there have been a couple of teachers who've reverted back to autopilot practices recently in that they're not actually reading before they click or act. So just another friendly reminder that when a teacher administers a summative test in error, they've not just clicked OK, they've actually typed summative in a box agreeing that they understand students can only take the test one time. Okay, so just as a reiteration there, please make sure that they are aware of that. Okay. All assessments in the test selection window are color-coded. The summative ones are blue. Okay, and the available tests are going to be organized into categories, just like they're shown here on the screen. You can click the plus sign button next to a category name to view the tests in that category to more accurately open a test session for a specific grade or specific subject area. And then to create a test session, select the test or tests that you are wishing to administer in that session, and those are going to populate in the box on the right. If you misselect anything, you can clear all with the garbage can or click the gray X next to the individual test to remove it. Then you just click Start RISE Live Test Session, and it's going to open the session so that it's ready for students. Once you click that Start button, the system is going to automatically generate a session ID, and the session ID is going to appear at the top of your teacher interface along with a Stop button. This ID is what you need to provide students to allow them to then continue their login process. When you're testing in person, most teachers elect to write this on the board, or they provide it to students on a printed card or something similar. If you do provide students with the information on paper, though, again, you need to be sure to collect it and destroy it when the session is complete. When students start to sign into the session, an approvals button is going to appear next to the session ID. And once you approve students for testing, the test session table will appear in the center, which is going to display students' testing progress. One of the recent enhancements is that you will see the approvals tab appear in a kind of a shaded pink color, and the number of approvals will pulse until they are approved. Okay, the approval spot is really the most important piece to be aware of. If you notice there's a little red number 1 next to it, that tells me I have 1 student waiting for approval. And you'll watch that number increase as students get logged into their secure browser. Just know they can't access any test items until you've hit that approval button. This is especially important to take note of with the Math 6 test, because once a student finishes the first segment of the test, they actually are going to be required to sign back in to the second portion of the test, which requires a second set of approvals. Okay. When students start to sign into the test session, again, that approval button is going to appear, and that's the one that you want to be very much aware of. And it's just there in that Tide banner. In the banner at the top of the window, you'll also see a set of buttons and your username. The student lookup tab is to search for student login information. It's also a way to verify that student login credentials are correct. You can click the approved requests to view the list of students. If they need a print request, if it's needed, you can click print session. If you want to print a screenshot of this screen, the help guide link is in the upper right. It allows you to access additional information about the test administration interface. And then you can also click the logout button under your account whenever you need to exit the site. If a student is having trouble logging in, you're going to use that student lookup feature to verify the login credentials. You can either use the quick search or the advanced search option to view the information entered. With the quick search, you're simply going to enter the student's SSID and click submit. The advanced search allows you to narrow your search using several filters like district, school, grade, first name, last name. When using either one of these searches, if the search results in any matches, the information is going to appear at the bottom of the window. If there's no match, you're actually going to see an error message. If you see a student that you're looking for, you can then click the little eyeball icon next to the student's name, and the screen will then display the student's information. Note that the information displayed may vary slightly from what is shown here. If there are no issues to take care of, though, you can begin approving student entry. It's very important, though, that you pay close attention to the test name prior to approval, just to be sure that students have selected the appropriate test, okay? To approve students for testing, you can click the check boxes one at a time or the approve all student option at the top. You can ensure the Spanish setting as well as other accommodations have been set by clicking that eyeball again and scrolling to the presentation section just to confirm. And even though you can approve all students at the same time, students actually need to be individually denied entry into a session. So you might be thinking, why would I deny a student entry to a test? Some reasons for this would be the student's not actually supposed to enter the testing session, or if any of the student's demographic information is incorrect, or if the student's required accommodations are incorrect, or if the student was issued an incorrect testing ticket and now needs to be logged out and reissued the one that's appropriate for their name and SSID. Okay, if you deny a student entry into a test, it's not going to prevent other approved students from beginning their tests. So you can still be taking care of that and students can start their session. If the student's test settings, again, are incorrect, the settings need to be updated and tied before the student takes the test. And this is actually where your second proctor comes in very handy, because one proctor can continue to support students as they enter the testing environment, while the other can work on troubleshooting support for that other student. Okay, verifying these things to begin with could also help cut down on the number of test appeals that are submitted for approval throughout your testing session. Also note here that no settings can be changed while the student is actively testing. So once a student begins a test, settings like the language option can't be changed without resetting the test opportunity. Updates to like background color or font size, those things are only going to take effect after the student logs out and logs back into resume testing, okay? Once students log in and are approved, proctors are then going to monitor their status from the table that's displayed on their screen, okay? The progress column displays the student's progress through the items on the test. The test settings column will display either standard or custom. This column is going to display custom when a student's test settings are different from what the default settings are for the test. Okay, and you can verify those again with the little eyeball icon. The action column allows you to pause a student's test. If at any time TDS detects that the student might be having a technical issue or might require assistance, a test with potential issues table is going to appear above the test without issues table. And then a little more info icon is going to appear in the test status column. When you hover over that little icon, it's going to display more information about what issue the student might be experiencing. If students request a printout, a printer icon is going to appear in the actions column. The print on request feature is only available for students who require it per their IEP or 504 plan. Okay, it is a testing impropriety to apply this restricted resource for a student who does not have an IEP or 504 document for this accommodation, okay? Please contact your school testing coordinator if your student needs this accommodation, or if you have questions regarding this accommodation, again, reach out to Jessica and she can help you with that. But students with this accommodation can request printouts of stimuli or items, just depending on their settings. So when a student sends a print request, the printer button will appear in the actions column and you can click the button to review the request. If you click the check button and approve the request, a cover sheet containing the student's name and SSID are going to display in a new browser window for you. And know, please, that no test content will ever display on your screen for you as the proctor, okay? You then click print, then OK in the next window just to complete the print request. If you click the X button to deny the print request, nothing is going to print. Before approving a student's print request, just ensure that whatever is being printed is being sent to a printer that is monitored by staff who have been trained in test security, because all of those printed items have to then be securely stored and destroyed immediately following the session, just like testing tickets and just like scratch paper. Okay. The approved request button allows you to view a list of every print request that you've approved during the session. And if you wish to print this list for your own records, you can do that by clicking print at the top. If you wish to print a snapshot of your screen in its current view, you just click the print session button. And this can be useful when tracking students who didn't complete their test and might need to be scheduled for another session. It might be necessary to set the page layout, though, to landscape or adjust the margins in your print preview screen, just in order for it to get it to fit on a page. So just kind of be aware of that. And also remember that any of these printouts also need to be destroyed securely because they are going to contain PII for your students. You have two options within the test administration interface to pause or stop a test session once it's begun. You can pause an individual student's test, or you can also stop an entire session. So to pause an individual test, you just click the pause button in the actions column for that student. And when prompted, click OK to confirm that you want to pause it. This option would be appropriate if a student becomes ill, was called to the office and didn't pause the test on their own, something like that. In the event that an emergency requires all students to stop testing, like an evacuation drill, you can pause all students' test immediately just by clicking the stop for the stop session, okay? If you stop the session, all of the in-progress tests are going to be paused. And once you stop that, you will then have to create a new test session and give a new session ID to the students for them to resume testing when you're back and able to do that. If you ever forget to log out before leaving a testing area, the session's actually going to automatically close after 20 minutes of inactivity on both the test administration computer as well as on student computers. So if that occurs, you'll then also need to create a new session and provide a new session ID to students if you need to resume testing after a situation like that. In the event that you need to transfer the monitoring and management of your session, you can actually transfer an active test session from one device or browser to another without stopping the session or even interrupting in-progress tests. This is a useful scenario when your computer malfunctions or if a laptop battery is dying, if you accidentally close the browser while a session's in progress, or maybe you're proctoring in a remote session and need the other proctor to take over with another device. Just note that transferring a session means that you need to enter the active session ID, okay? So first, just again, do not log out of the previous session or stop it, because if you do, it's going to end the session and pause all the students' tests. But while the session is still active on the original device or browser, sign into the test administration site on a new device. When the session ID prompt appears, just enter the active session ID in the text box, click enter, and the administration site will then appear, allowing you to continue monitoring the student progress that's already occurring. And then the test session on the previous computer or browser is going to automatically close, okay? It's not going to stop the session or pause the student tests. It just allows you to move the proctoring piece from one device to another in a seamless manner if it's needed. Upon completion of a session, you'll click the logout button in the upper right corner of the page. And it is preferred that you log out only after stopping your test session, because logging out is going to cause any in-progress test to be paused if a student was still testing. A confirmation message is going to appear asking you to confirm that you actually want to exit the website and pause all students' tests. This scenario also occurs when you navigate to another website from the test administration interface, okay? Regardless of when or how you log out or navigate away from the test site, though, student data is not going to be lost, okay? If you need to, again, access another site, though, during the test session, we just encourage you to do that in a separate browser window so it doesn't interfere with your test administration window. This table presents some of the common issues that you or your students may encounter during a test session. I'm not going to go through them individually, but you can reference the slides on your own following the training and review the information. But just know there's even more detailed information and additional technical tips in the test administration manual itself, okay? And with that, do we have any questions on testing tickets or monitoring testing through the test administration interface? Just know that we are going to look at how students interact next, okay? But this gives you a chance, if you have questions on any of those things or something else that's come up, go ahead and drop those in the chat as well.
Hey, Elise. I think we got a question from Ashley about testing tickets.
Let's see. Is it the how far ahead one, Colin? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yep, that's
Oh, I addressed that one after she had typed it.
Oh,
Just
my
that
apologies.
we prefer that you print them and give them to students the morning of. Don't send them home with students. They should not leave the testing area.
Awesome. My apologies. I missed that.
Yeah, no problem. You're fine. Thank you. Anything else before we move on? Okay. Are we allowed to break up the test in different sessions, or does it have to be done at the same time? Heather, so that is a local decision. You can have separate sessions. This is definitely more common in like our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes where they are only with their teacher for a specific time period, like 3rd period is when they have math, so they're only going to take their math class during 3rd period math time. And so that math teacher might elect to then separate it out over, we're going to start testing on Monday and we're going to have it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. In an elementary school with your younger students, you might not want to test for 90 straight minutes. That's pretty, that can cause some testing fatigue for some of our younger kiddos. So separating it out and saying, hey, we're gonna do testing for 35 minutes today because we have time for it. That would be acceptable. But again, that's a local decision. So you'll want to check with your administration, whether that be through your LEA or your school administrators, to see what their preference is and what they plan to do. Okay. Any other questions before we move into the student interface for testing? We cannot limit the number of questions. Correct, Andy. You can't pace your students. So I can't say, okay, friends, today we're going to start our test and we're going to do 10 questions today, and then we're going to stop. What you can do is say, we're going to start taking our test. We have 35 minutes allotted for testing today. And then you follow your scripting, because even in there, you have like the 5-minute warning so that students can go back and review things that they had marked, things like that. So you can give them a time frame, but you cannot pace them, if that helps provide clarification. Great question. Any other wonderings before we move into the student interface? Missed the beginning. Is there only one test for each subject? Haley, so you'll have the ELA test for reading, then you'll have the science test and math tests, and science is only for grades 4 through 8. The ELA reading and math are grades 3 through 8, and then writing is for grades 5 and 8. So one test for each of the subjects that a student would be enrolled in, but also an important caveat to be aware of and remember is that the Math 6 test has 2 parts, has 2 segments. I don't believe there are other segmented tests, but our content specialist can correct me if that's incorrect. But if I remember correctly, it's only Math 6 that has a segmented test. Perfect. Thank you, Eric. That's the only one. Okay, so for our students, they are going to log into the secure browser that is installed on their device, okay? You'll notice that the first name, the SSID, and the session ID are all required for sign-in. Students need to use the secure browser, again, to access any of the RISE tests. The secure browser is designed to ensure test security because it prohibits students from accessing any other programs or websites during testing. Your school's technology coordinator is responsible for ensuring that the secure browser has been correctly installed on all testing devices. If you have questions about installation of the secure browser, again, reach out to your technology coordinator. If they have questions, I would encourage them to reach out to the help desk with our RISE vendor with CAI, and they can help them with any technology related questions that they might have. To log into the online testing system, then the student, again, is going to use the secure browser. on a separate computer or device than the one being used by the teacher or the proctor. And when entries are complete, the student is just going to click the sign in button and log into the test. With this, proctors can assist students with login if necessary. Okay, it totally happens. If a student, though, is having difficulty logging in, an error message or code is going to display on the login screen. The most common errors occur when a student's first name and SSID just don't match what's in the system, or when SSIDs are entered incorrectly, or if a space is entered inadvertently, okay? If a student receives an error message indicating that they've entered incorrect information in either the first name or the SSID field, the teacher can use that student lookup tool we looked at earlier to verify student information. Another common error occurs when students enter the incorrect session ID. If a student receives that message, just verify that the session ID was entered correctly with no extra spaces or characters. If a student receives the error message, session has expired, just ensure that the student has actually entered, again, the correct session ID for the current session, not one that maybe they had somehow memorized or was holding over from the last class period or something like that. After logging in, students are going to complete a few more steps before they begin testing. So the students are going to be asked to view and verify their personal information. If their information is correct, they should click yes. If the information is incorrect, they should click no, okay? You would then need to work with your school or district testing coordinator to have the student's information updated and tied before the student attempts to log in again. This is important to pay attention to because some students have the same first and last names, okay? The grade and the SSID need to also match. So we need to make sure that students are taking the correct test under the correct credentials and that Susie Smith in 4th grade isn't accidentally taking a test for Susie Smith who is in 5th grade, okay? On your test screen, students will see a list of their assigned tests for the session. If the tests displayed are incorrect or the expected test isn't listed, students should click the back to login button and just return to their login page and talk to the proctor to just resolve the issue there. If there's no errors though, the student can click the correct test and then just wait for approval to proceed further. Okay, just note that this screenshot is for training tests, so no, it's just going to look a little bit different for a summative test. Ashley asks, when testing remotely, at what point of the login process can you communicate students about issues? Ashley, I believe it is after they have entered the test itself, so like the start test. Eric, is that correct? Or Colin, can you confirm that they have to have gone through like the audio visual checks and things like that before they can communicate?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, they have to be logged in and then they have to be connected to the session. So yeah, so after the audio checks.
Okay, thanks. So after the proctor has approved students for a test session, students are going to see a screen titled Choose Settings. This screen shows the name of the test as well as any selected accessibility resources. If the information is correct, the student should click Select. If any of the information is incorrect, though, they can still click the Go Back and then wait for help from their teacher. The teacher would then need to read the required scripting located in the TAM to guide students through the login and confirmation process. After verifying their test, students will proceed through a series of functionality checks to make sure that their device is functioning properly. When students have finished all of those audiovisual checks, they will need to click Continue to move on. These checks are great because they also allow for headphones to be tested before getting into the test itself. Rather than having a student realize 2 or 3 questions in that their headphones don't work, they've already tested it to begin with so that they don't need to worry about that once they're in the testing environment. Next, students are going to review information about the tools and navigation features that they have access to during the testing experience from the instructions and the help screen. Yes, Amy, everyone needs headphones. The additional test information section lists any additional information that's necessary to help students know while they're in that testing session. And then the help guide section contains an overview of the test site, test rules, information on text-to-speech, and then the print on request features. But know that when a student clicks the little begin test now, that's when they will be shown the first question of the test. And for Ashley, after they click the begin test now, that is when they will then have those communication features available to them in a remote setting. On to similarly with remote, since we're talking about it here, administering assessments to remote students does require additional considerations above what would be encountered in a classroom setting, okay? This functionality is currently only available for students who receive all of their instruction in a remote setting. So because of the nature of remote testing, completing a training test remotely with the teacher as the proctor is also required prior to administration of a summative assessment for RISE, okay? Any scripting provided in the TAM is also still required. So while completing a test, remote students will be able to communicate with proctors directly by clicking on the icon at the bottom of their screen. And we're going to review that a bit if you're unfamiliar, okay? It'll just come a little bit later. Students also will be able to just know that they cannot communicate or see other students during the administration. They can only communicate and see their teacher or proctor. Because of this, it is also imperative to have a second secure way of communicating with students, like your LMS, to communicate the testing session ID prior to the session itself, or that encrypted email. The remote administration method for RISE testing allows teachers and students, again, to communicate both through text and video chat within TDS, and additionally allows the capability for the teacher to monitor students directly. So students will connect to the remote test session using the secure browser. While teachers and students don't need to buy or install any additional software to enable the feature, they do need to have a device that has working speakers, camera, microphone, and ensure that the secure browser has been installed on the student devices that will be used for testing. Teachers are going to sign into the RISE test administration site just as they would if the students were testing in person. With remote testing, there should be no more than 10 students allocated to 2 proctors during a remote testing session, because active proctoring with students in a remote setting is challenging, okay? These 2 proctors need to be in the same room during the testing sessions for ease of communication. This means that them trying to communicate through Zoom, through different offices or different locations is not allowable. It's easier to troubleshoot any unforeseen technical issues if you're not attempting to do it through video conferencing or text messaging. For RISE, we also ask that you conduct one more training test, again, just prior to the beginning of your summative administration, so that all users can ensure their technology is working as expected, that accommodations are set, and that the communication tools are functioning as expected. When you do this, you don't need to necessarily go through every single item on the training test and finish it. You just need to make sure everything is working as expected, okay, just before you start. As a reminder, no parents or siblings are permitted to be in the room with students who are testing, and the quiet testing environment should still be enforced. So no music should be playing, TVs shouldn't be on in the background, things like that. While completing a test remotely, students will be able to communicate, again, through text or video with their proctors directly just by using the functionality provided within the system. The system also requires that the teacher monitors students directly through the proctor dashboard features. I should note here that students will not be able, again, to see or communicate with other students during the administration of the remote test. They can only see and communicate with their proctor. This is your remote proctoring checklist, which is provided in the RISE TAM. It should be completed before any remote proctoring, just to ensure that both the teacher and the student devices are working as expected. Testing and ticket information needs to be communicated to students, as well as guidance for how to appropriately destroy the information if it is printed. This also extends to their scratch paper that they're using at home. And again, just complete the training test in every content area that students are expected to test remotely in, because we don't want our students who are taking math remotely to not have had access to a math training test in that remote situation either. So make sure that if they are taking all of those tests remotely, they access the training test of each of those remotely as well, so they're familiar with the tools that are provided. This chart describes the hardware and software requirements for the teacher's machine. Before testing, you'll need to ensure that they meet the minimum requirements necessary for remote testing. You can also use the RISE diagnostic tool that's linked on the bottom for RISE tests. For students needing to take a remote summative assessment, there's an online student field for the student settings in TIDE, okay? All users are going to be able to see this field, but users with the school administrator role and above, like an LEA user, can edit that. This means a teacher cannot edit it, okay? This does need to be set prior to students testing as appropriate. So if it's set to yes, the student will receive the remote testing tools. If it is unset, like left blank, or set to no, the student will receive the standard in-person test administration. Similar to an in-person session, to proctor a remote session, you would select that option from the test administration tab from the RISE portal. But instead of using the active sessions tab, we encourage you to use the upcoming sessions tab so that you can schedule your remote sessions. To schedule a remote proctoring session, you'll select the date. It's really easy. You just pick the desired date from the calendar. Also, if the session is a remote session, a pop-up window appears in your web browser requesting access to your microphone and camera. Okay, users need to select allow. If you don't select allow, students taking the test will not be able to see or hear you during any video conferencing that might take place. Again, all of the test types are color-coded in very user-friendly drop-downs for this selection. When you view the lists of assessments, if you're expecting to see one that doesn't appear, I just recommend checking your testing windows, as that could be influencing which tests appear or do not appear in these drop-downs. For example, the interim assessments don't appear here, but that's because they weren't available during the window that I set, okay? If they had been available, their drop-down would appear in a green color. This warning box, again, is going to appear when you select any summative assessment, remote or otherwise, to administer, and you will need to type summative to move forward. Once you've verified that yes, you are planning to administer a summative test, you will want to verify the tests that you've selected. So see here, I selected remote summative, but I could have used the little add button to specifically select the content and grade for like ELA 6. I've named my session as well here in the right below. You can see remote testing session, but you can instruct proctors to reflect maybe a teacher name or a type of test. So it could say like Mrs. Fry, math, grade 6. Although this isn't necessary, but it is going to help you organize things if there's some sort of standard that you are setting for your session name. Once you've made the necessary selections, you can save your session, and the session information pop-up window will appear. This pop-up window is going to provide the session ID that teachers need to share with students so they can join the session when it starts. And this is the piece of information that also needs to be communicated securely to students. This information should not be shared over any unsecure communication method. So like a personal email or a text message, that's not appropriate. Teachers need to communicate this information to students using a secure method, such as the classroom management system that you already use for teaching, or again with an encrypted email. This is one of the reasons, though, that you'll want to conduct a training test prior, because you want your teachers and your students to be very, very familiar with the communication process before, during, after testing. If a teacher needs to, they can modify sessions that were scheduled in advance but haven't started yet. For example, a teacher might want to modify a session after it was created to change the start or end date. To do this, they just need to access the RISE Test Administration site and then open the options for editing or deleting the sessions, then become available with the little pencil or the garbage can. For students signing in on their devices in a remote setting with the secure browser, they use the same login interface displayed on the RISE secure browser that in-person students do. They will log in with their first name, their SSID, and the session ID that was provided to them securely. They will verify their personal information, and then they need to select the required test. And at this point, they will be waiting for approval from their teacher before beginning. Once they're approved, they will then complete the series of audiovisual checks as if they were in person. Okay. And then once the remote session has started and the students have joined, things are going to look a little bit different because of the communication tools. So teachers can communicate then with all of the students using the broadcast feature by selecting the megaphone. The teacher can also type a message and then select the send icon, which would then automatically appear on the screen of each student in the session. But because we all know students love to use like a text or a chat feature, it might be really helpful to remind students that they don't need to individually reply to a broadcast message unless they're requested to do so, okay? Because students can respond to messages from the teacher just by typing a message in the chat box. When the student sends a message, a little message waiting icon is going to appear under their image on the test administration site. The teacher just selects the student's image to view that message. As with most applications, selecting the X to close the pop-up window in the corner will clear it off your screen. And I say mention to students what your communication expectations are beforehand. just so that you don't end up with multiple responses on a broadcast message, again, unless that is your heart's desire, but let your students know what your communication expectations are within the testing site as well. While students are testing off-site, teachers can observe video of all students at once in low resolution or select one student at a time to view high resolution video feeds. Teachers can view that high resolution video feed if they select the student video icon from the student that they want to view. And if needed, teachers can then start a one-on-one video conference call. And during that video conference, teachers can see and hear the student. And if the teacher allows, the student can also see and hear the teacher. You just do this by selecting the student video icon for the student that you want to speak with. And the video conference pop-up is going to open, and it's going to display that high resolution video of the student that we just looked at. But you can take it one step further by selecting the call icon to then be able to speak with the student in real time. Once that call is initiated on the teacher's device, a pop-up window displays a split screen of the teacher and the student. On the student's device, the window displays automatically, okay? It's going to automatically display that split screen view of you and the student. The teacher, though, can then toggle the webcam or the microphone on and off using the buttons displayed at the top of the window. You can also just disconnect the call using the button at the bottom, just like you would see on your phone. Students who need assistance can request it from their teacher by virtually raising their hand. When they do this, they will appear at the top of the class list, making it really easier for you to monitor that proctoring dashboard. Okay, teachers can respond to students' requests for assistance by either, again, initiating a chat or a video, just like we went over. You can also then lower the student's hand once your communication is complete so that they no longer appear at the top of your screen. If a student's question requires a teacher to be able to view the student's screen, there is also screen sharing functionality. The teacher would need to select the view icon, and the student will be prompted to then give permission to the teacher to view their computer screen. And once the student specifies which screen they want to share, a little red dashed border is going to appear around the student's screen, and the teacher will then be able to see the student's screen. Okay? There are two ways to end the screen sharing. The student can select the stop sharing button on their screen, and the teacher can select the end icon in the video conference window on their screen when that needs to end. Just like an in-person test session though, test alerts are going to appear on the list of students in the RISE testing system if the system itself has not detected any activity from the student for a while. And this might happen if the student's computer's gone to sleep or if the student is experiencing some interruption. In the event of a test alert, all student responses are saved, so there's no concern about students losing any of their test data, but students with the test alert automatically move to a test with potential issues list at the top of the page. And you can address this in a myriad of ways. You can either select the student video icon for the student to see what might be going on in the testing environment. You can also send a chat message or just, again, initiate that one-on-one video conference with the student to see what might be going on. Okay. Before we look at the test interface from the student perspective, I also want to draw your attention to the global tools and other features that are available for all students, whether remote or in person, whether with accommodations or not. All of these things are available to all students during testing. Okay, we're going to look at these tools and features in detail on the following slides, but know the global tools, again, available for any student. The assistive technology tools, however, are the ones that require state approval, and any questions on those should be directed to our special education specialist. So the following interface information, again, is for all users, not just remote users. You'll notice there are arrows in the top left, which are there for students to use when advancing back and forth between questions, and the other available tools appear in the upper right with some in collapsible hamburger style menus on the question or on the cluster itself. So the notepad appears in the item-specific hamburger dropdown. Students can use the notepad to make notes about an item. The notepad is item-specific, so students can only access those notepad notes for a question when they're on that one question of the tests page. Okay, once they move to a new question, that notepad is going to be cleared for the next question. But the notes tool is not item-specific. Anything a student types into this section is going to be available throughout the entire test. Okay, these notes are saved and continue to be accessible for later segments, also in a segmented test like the Math 6 one. The notes will also be retained if the student logs out for the test and then resumes later. There's also a highlighter tool. To use the highlighter tool, you can either select the desired text and right-click and then click the highlight selection button that pops up, or you can find it in the item-specific hamburger drop-down menu with the stimulus itself. And then to remove the highlighting, students just right-click in the area of the highlighted text and select Reset Highlighting. If a student pauses the test, any highlighting made before is also going to be retained. Students can use this strike-through tool to help them visually eliminate answers they believe are incorrect or that they just wish to ignore. To do this, they would right-click on the text of the answer they want to mark and click strike-through. The answer text will then display with a line through it, okay? To remove that strike-through, they right-click and choose Undo Strike-Through. It's important to note that strike-through answers, though, doesn't indicate a response to a question. So if it's like a multiple choice and there's 4 options, if they've done strike-through on 3 of them, it doesn't automatically mark the other one correct, okay? The student still needs to select a response to the answer. Also know that the strike-through doesn't prevent the student from selecting that item as the answer either. So just kind of be aware of that and let students know of that functionality. Another element of the online test which is helpful for students is the mark for review feature. As students go through a test, students are required to answer each question on the screen before they can move forward. So they should provide what they think is the best answer. But if they're unsure of an answer, they can mark that item or items with the little flag so that they are reminded to review them before submitting. Okay, so to mark an item for review, you just use that hamburger drop-down menu for the item and select Mark for Review. The item number is going to display with a little dog-eared corner and a small flag. So at any time then during the test segment, the student can go back to those marked items and review or change the answers as needed. To unmark an item, students can choose the same drop-down menu from the item and select Unmark Review Item. Just note here that once a student has completed a test segment in a test that prohibits navigation to previous segments of their test, or if it's been paused for more than 20 minutes, returning to items marked for review is not going to be allowed, okay? However, the 20-minute rule does not apply to cluster style questions, so be aware of that. But this is why the 5-minute warning in the scripting is so important, because it gives students time to then go and review those marked items, because if they try to come back tomorrow, they're not going to be able to review those that they'd already marked for review in a new session, okay? So that's, again, why that scripting is important to say there's 5 minutes left in this test. Karen, can you elaborate on the 20-minute rule not applying to clusters? Yeah, sure. So with the cluster question, it just means that if the student's test is paused for more than 20 minutes or they didn't finish the cluster before the testing session ended, for example, if a cluster has 6 items that require a response to move forward and the student has responded to 2 of those, when they come back the following day, those 2 items they responded to are still there and responded, but the other ones are left blank so they can continue on that particular cluster item. It doesn't jump them to the next one. Does that help clarify? Perfect. During testing, students can also use the zoom feature to increase the size of text and graphics. An English glossary feature is available for students to use for the ELA reading test in grades 3 through 5. It's on the passages and items during testing. Students can access the glossary just by clicking on any of the pre-selected terms which are indicated on the screen with a gray dotted outline. When the student hovers their mouse over that term, it's going to highlight in blue. And when you click on that highlighted term, a pop-up box is going to appear with a definition for the term if they need it. The masking tool allows students to cover up a distracting area of a test page. They can click the masking button and then click and drag their mouse to select a rectangular area on the screen. Once they've covered the portion they want to cover, they will then need to deactivate the masking mode by clicking the masking button again. Those masked areas are going to remain on the screen even after masking mode is deactivated. But if they need to remove the masking area, they just click on the X in the upper corner. The Select Previous Version tool allows students to view and restore responses that they previously entered and saved for a text response item. To use this tool, students are going to open the menu for a text response item and click Select Previous Version. And then a window is going to appear listing any saved responses for the item and the text associated with each one. They can then review those previous responses and select a response version in the left of the panel. They can then read and review the associated text in the right panel. And if they choose to, they can restore one of those responses just by clicking Select at the bottom of the window. Okay, the selected response is then going to appear in the answer area for the item. Note that the Select Previous Version tool cannot, though, restore responses that were entered prior to that 20-minute pause rule. If a student has the Spanish adaptive version of the math or science test enabled in Tide, this globe icon is going to appear with the other globe tools. And we've looked at this already previously, but the student can then use that button as a toggle tool to change the presented language between English and Spanish. If your school plans to test over multiple days, you may need to have students pause their test at a certain point so that they can resume testing another time. You may also allow a pause if students are taking a break from testing, like a quick 5-minute stretch break, or if they need to leave the room for like a restroom break or something like that. Whether they've been instructed to do so or not, students can pause their test, though, at any time by clicking the pause button in the upper left corner of the screen. When it comes to pausing tests, some rules do apply. For all tests that have been paused for less than 20 minutes, students are going to be able to return from that short break in testing and revisit any of the items in the current test segment and change their answers if desired. Okay? Students taking all tests except writing who have paused their test for longer than 20 minutes can only return to the most recently viewed page containing unanswered test items, so like in a cluster. Okay, they can change any present answers on the page, but they can't access any items on previous pages. But if all items on the most recently visited page were answered prior to pausing, the student is then going to resume the test on the next page with unanswered items and are not going to be able to allow access for previous pages or segments if that 20 minutes has been passed, okay? But again, a writing test is going to be allowable to revisit at any time as long as the student hasn't submitted yet, okay? On a related note, as a security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are logged out and their tests are paused automatically. Inactivity is determined by whether or not the student is interacting with the test by selecting answers or using the navigation tools. So just know that clicking empty space on the screen, not considered test activity, okay? Students will receive a warning message though prior to being logged out, and they have to click OK on that pop-up within 60 seconds to avoid the automatic logout and pausing of their test. So if a student's test is paused due to inactivity, the same rules apply as when the student initially paused their test. Okay, so students can log in to the test again and resume from that point where testing was interrupted, just subject to the pause rule. Something to be aware of, again, specific to the Math 6 test, it has 2 segments. So when students reach the end of the first test segment, they will receive a warning message asking them to confirm that they want to move to the second segment. The warning also advises that they cannot return, okay, to change any answers if they move on. Proctors need to ensure that students are aware of this outcome of ending the segment and just encourage their students to check their answers before moving to the second segment. And again, as a reminder, the proctor will need to approve the students before they can enter that segment, the second segment, because it is going to include the calculator global tool that was not included previously. Question in the chat. ELA passage questions will be available after a pause session and for that passage, even though the questions are on different tabs, as long as the student is still in that passage. Eric, can you help me out with that one?
I'm trying to think. I think with that one, it's one of those edge cases. I believe they can only, I think they can see the full passage still with all the questions if they leave one of them empty, but I have to double check on that because they are considered separate items. I don't think the tabs go away as long as they leave one open, but I would need to confirm.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't see this one that often.
Rachel, for the science clusters, Those all appear, your stimuli are all going to appear together with the cluster items on the separate screen. And so the student's going to could answer feasibly one or two of those. And then if this test is paused, it's going to resume on that very same page with the science clusters. So when students have responded to all of the items within the test, they're going to click the next button and we'll be presented with the little congratulations, you've reached the end of the testing screen. Students are then going to have a choice. They can review their answers or they can submit, okay? Their ability to review and change answers is still, of course, subject to the pause rule if it's applicable. But this is a great time to have some set procedures in place, like having students notify the teacher before submission. Some people like that. Some people don't. Some just want the students to submit. Okay. The TAM does have very specific directions for ending tests. So make sure that those ending scripts are also read with your students. If you happen to have, though, a click happy kiddo who just happens to submit a writing test before it's finished, it can be reopened with a test appeal. And we'll go over that towards the end of the training. But just know not all is lost if they hit submit before they were actually ready on a writing test. To end a test with a remote proctoring, it is similar. After the session is ended and once an individual student logs out of the session, teachers and students are no longer going to be able to communicate each other within RISE. So guidance will need to be provided to students prior to ending, since no communication within RISE is going to occur after the student submits their test. So it's highly recommended that teachers and students using the RISE training tests, again, practice using the technology built into the system, okay? Also note that stopping a session automatically logs out all students. So if you're in a remote session, you don't want to stop it until you've ensured that all of your students have paused or finished, depending on what your goal was for that particular session. Even with remote sessions, again, materials considered secure should be stored between assessment sessions and then destroyed at the completion of the test according to any local procedures that you have in place. This, again, includes things like scratch paper, graph paper, anything that was written on by your students, testing tickets, things like that. So with that, we're going to stop and address any other questions that are related to administration as well as global tools. And I'm looking out my window and it's like a blizzard. That was a little unnerving. Sorry. Any questions for how to administer or any of the global tools available to students? If you're sitting there wondering if it's a great time to ask the question, the next section we're talking about is actually reporting. So this is a great time if it's still test related, that we'll go through reporting as well as testing cleanup things for the LEA users. Not seeing anything, so I'll go ahead and move forward slowly. Oh, do you have suggestions for destroying scratch paper when administering tests remotely? Tara, my suggestions would be to communicate with students and parents that as soon as the session is done, the scratch paper itself is shredded. Because then it's no longer accessed in either the garbage can or the recycle bin, whichever is preferred by the family. But as long as it's shredded, then it's no longer readable or legible or accessible. Anything else that you're wondering about so far? Okay, then we'll keep going. So for reporting, this is where you're going to find student results. And before we dive in, it's imperative to note that there will be a delay in reporting this year for ELA reading and writing, okay? These are expected to be in the RISE portal sometime this fall. Depending on when these delayed reports become available, I will either add a portion to the fall 2025 RISE administration training that I do for benchmarks and interims, or I will add it to an AD meeting, whether it be August, September, October, depending on when those reports become available. So just be looking forward to that, okay? When you log into the reporting system, the first thing you see is the dashboard where you can view overall assessment results for all of your assessments. The dashboard generator allows the user to determine which types of test groups that you'd like to start with. This screen will also allow quick searching for a specific SSID. as well as changing various settings in the features and tools menu, like changing reporting time period to look at historical RISE data. You can download student results as well as other functionality there. Once you've selected the test groups and any relevant settings, just click the green Go to Dashboard button at the bottom and proceed. The selections chosen can be changed at any time by using the dashboard generator link at the top on the left side of the screen. It's important to note that teacher dashboard and the admin or LEA dashboard do look slightly different, but users can see overall test results directly from the dashboard page. This screen also shows the filters panel to the left of the table. It's expanded here to show the options available to the user. If you're not initially seeing the information you believe you should be seeing, I would strongly recommend that you check your filters, because oftentimes it's just because they're set to view a specific set of data that could be excluding the set that you're looking for, because it is going to kind of remember what you were looking for last time. So just know, if you expected to see something that wasn't there, open that filter section and just make sure that it's set to show you what you expect to see. You can view performance by roster or by student using the tabs across the top. We're going to start with roster and then move to student in a bit. The first two fields will show the course and the teacher. The next columns, they show student count, which is the number of students who took each test. Then there's the completion rate, which is how many students are currently finished. It then also shows the average score, the performance distribution, as well as the percent proficient. And you can use the gray triangles across the top to sort by student count, completion rate, as well as scale score. Because summative assessments have reporting category sections, you can compare the performance of your school in each reporting category. Just click each colored vertical section bar to expand or collapse it. In this example, you can view a performance distribution bar for each roster under each reporting category. When making comparisons, though, just be careful to take into account the consideration of like a student count, just to determine the value of the comparison itself. For summative assessments, you can also view strength and weakness designations for reporting categories in the performance by roster tab. The strength and weakness designations compare an individual school's performance on a specific standard with the overall performance on the test. So on each line, the comparison is relative to the individual student and utilizes various symbols to provide just a quick overview of performance. It's important to note that performance by item is not going to be seen at any level with a summative test. Users are only going to see those strength or weakness designations at aggregate levels, okay? If a plus sign is shown, it's an area of strength. If an equal sign is shown, performance on that standard just means that it's similar to performance on the test as a whole. If a negative sign is shown, it is an area of weakness. And if you see an asterisk, that indicates that there is insufficient information for that particular standard. Okay, this information can also be accessed on a more granular level by teachers for their own rosters and students assigned specifically to them. When viewing performance by student, the first two fields show the students' names and SSID. Okay, the next columns show scale scores, performance distribution, as well as the percent proficient. And you'll notice those same colored vertical section bars will expand and provide more information regarding that standard. One of the other features included in that waffle menu is the breakdown by button, and this allows you to compare performance by the various groups that are represented. You can make your selections and then move down to the download student results to export any of that information, and those will export to a PDF, a zip, or a CSV formatted file. These go straight to your secure file center when they're ready for access, and then you can open them there. The download student results box is also where you can print your ISRs that are the ones that need to be provided to parents within 3 weeks of testing completion. You can also print those from that same screen. Summative assessments cover multiple reporting categories. So when you click the little eye icon, this performance level table is going to show up. Okay, it's also going to show the ranges for the scale score, which correlate to the proficiency level. Again, important to note, ELA for reading is going to be delayed until sometime in the fall later this year. The scores are shown as scale scores because a scale score makes it possible for us to compare one student's score to another student's score when they didn't respond to the same questions, which is what we use since RISE Summative is adaptive and not all students answer the same set of questions, okay? These scale scores are the same from year to year, with the exception of ELA and writing this year, okay? And there is a slide deck in the resources section of the RISE portal if you would like more information regarding those cut scores for subjects and grade levels, okay? Again, important to note, ELA this year will have a new set of cut scores determined, all right? This score, the scale score is then given a performance distribution by proficiency, and those proficiency levels describe how students applied the content-specific knowledge and skills as outlined by the core, whether it being below proficient, approaching proficient, or highly proficient. Again, there are going to also be changes to what writing, reporting, and those rubrics look like. Those changes are not in production yet, or they're in production and not published yet. So no screenshots are available at this time, but know that along with the delay in scoring, there's going to be a change in the writing dimension reporting data, which was provided for the first time for 2024, as the rubric changes are still being configured within the system. But if you have specific questions regarding scoring for writing or even reading, as there are changes coming there as well, don't hesitate to reach out to our ELA specialists if you have those questions. Just know that when more guidance regarding ELA and writing reports become available, again, I will share it with LEA assessment directors in either an AD meeting or in the training that we do in the fall so that they can then share them with their teachers and schools that they support. We do anticipating accessing those ISRs though to remain the same or at least similar. So I'm going to go over that now. To generate and view or export an ISR for a writing assessment, you're just going to use the student results generator, and each ISR is going to show a student's performance on their writing assessment, okay? The student results generator presents a series of panels in which to select various options depending on what page you start from, okay? Some of the options might even be pre-selected, and then you'll just select the desired filtering options. The select students section contains a list of rosters, so I can either select an entire roster, a selection of students from the list, or I can even enter a specific SSID into the search bar if I only want one or two of the students to be printed. From the two report type options in the panel on the right, you'll then just select the option for ISRs, and the selection section is going to show you the number of ISRs that are going to be generated with other options that show up below. If you're generating multiple ISRs, then under report format, you'll want to either choose a single PDF for all of the ISRs or a zip file containing a separate PDF for each one. Okay, if you select single PDF, the student results generator may create a zip file of multiple PDFs depending on the number of schools, grades, or the opportunities that are included, so just be aware of that. Under PDF type, you can select either simple or detailed, and then you just click generate. Once the ISR is generated, and when it's finished, it's going to appear in your secure file center, okay, in that inbox. And you can then go and download those. Again, if any of this changes between now and when the ISRs become available, I will share that with our LEA assessment directors to then disseminate to their interested populations with their schools or teachers, okay? Do we have any questions on RISE reporting before we move on to the test appeals process? Okay, then we will continue with test appeals. So the test appeal requests are a way of interrupting the normal flow of test submissions to reporting. So for example, a student may need to get back into a segment that they incorrectly exited, or like we mentioned before, our little Click Happy friend that submitted the writing test before they were actually done, or maybe even have a grace period extension if they had to pause their test, but then didn't have time to review because they didn't actually end up coming back. A test administrator may want to invalidate a test because of an issue with academic dishonesty as well, okay? A student may have completed a test without issue, but then also maybe obtained a parental exclusion after the fact. That would then require the test to be invalidated. All of these situations are going to require a test appeal. So to create a test appeal request, you'll need to access TIDE. And these need to be submitted at least 1 day prior to the end of the testing window so that the student can still complete the opportunity if it's needed, okay? Once an appeal has been requested, the LEA level user then needs to review the appeal request status to either accept it or reject it. There are a myriad of test appeal options to choose from, but as you're deciding which type of appeal to create or review, it's important to understand that if you invalidate the test, that actually eliminates the test opportunity for the student completely. It will no longer appear as a test opportunity at all, okay? So be familiar with the descriptions for each of these when creating appeals and approving or denying those. You can create the appeal by first doing the following. You're going to select Create Appeals Request, and then the Create Appeal Request page is going to appear, and then you'll be able to select the request type. Then just select Search. You'll mark the checkbox for each result that you want the appeal applied to. And then from the Select a Reason, you'll need to choose that from the drop-down. Select a reason for creating appeal request is important. The reasons may vary based on the appeal request type, but entering a reason for the request in the window that pops up is going to help you determine whether you're going to approve it or deny it, okay? And Tide's actually going to display a confirmation message after that is done as well. As an LEA user, you then approve or reject the appeal. For what it's worth, you can also view, retract, or export existing appeal requests from the same spot. From the appeal request task menu on the Tide dashboard, you just select the View, Approve, Export Appeal Requests. And then the View, Export, Appeal Requests page is going to appear. To retrieve the appeal request that you want to view, you just fill out the search criteria and select Search. And I would strongly encourage you to review the reason for the appeal request by selecting that little green quotation button that appears in the request status column, because I'd like to believe it goes without saying that because isn't an appropriate reason for a test appeal, but that's not always been the case. Because sometimes we get really busy and we just want to go in and believe that teachers had a really great reason and we just approve them all. And because is not an appropriate reason to reset a student's test or invalidate a test. So if that has been put in, please reach out to the person who submitted the test appeal for more information to edit that, okay? To approve appeals, you'll select the appeal to be approved and then click the process button when ready. You just follow the same procedure if you're going to reject it or retract it as well. Okay. Please note this is a two-step procedure because a lot of times I see the appeal is created in the system and then the approval process is ignored. Okay. So to complete the appeal, the request has to be reviewed and then processed. I would recommend checking for testing appeals at least weekly just to keep on top of them throughout the year. But when your testing window actually opens for summative testing, I would encourage you to check this daily, if not hourly, with some of our larger LEAs, okay? There's also guidance included in the Tide user guide on how to do this with appeals requests all at once using an upload file method if you're interested. It's important to monitor testing progress and enter participation codes throughout the test window because as testing progresses, it's easier to do it as it's going rather than waiting till it's all completely done, okay? After testing though, LEA level users are going to use Tide to clean up their data using the data cleanup menu that's in this blue section of the Tide dashboard. And in the data cleanup menu, the discrepancy resolution page allows LEA level users to view and clean up test discrepancies where students were eligible for a test that was supposed to be given to them, but they didn't actually end up taking it. So LEA level users can then clean up that data by entering the appropriate participation codes as applicable for the students who appear on those discrepancy resolution reports. So to do this, you first fill out the fields given and hit search. The results of the search are going to be generated showing the students within the search criteria who still have discrepancies. So for example, those who were eligible for a summative test at any point, but just hadn't started it. Next, you'll select the tools icon button to resolve the discrepancy, and then the resolve discrepancy page is going to appear. With that, you can select the edit pencil to assign a participation code to the student listed in that row. Then the assign non-participation code page is going to appear. Use the drop-down menu given to assign a non-participation code to the student as applicable, and then just click Save when you're finished. And a confirmation screen is going to appear confirming that the discrepancy has been resolved. As a reminder, you should be entering participation codes for students throughout your testing window rather than waiting until after testing to clean up all of the data for students at once, okay? LEA level users should talk to school administrators and teachers about this process and set up some communication channels for this information just to be relayed in a more efficient fashion. So if you're waiting until after testing though to clean up the testing data, Again, use that discrepancy resolution report in the data cleanup section 2 weeks prior to the testing window of your LEA or school, okay? As a reminder, all participation codes need to be submitted, I want to say June 13th this year. Eric, is that correct? That's a week after the window closes, or are we going the Monday after it closes?
We typically give it till the Monday after, just to give people
The
a
Monday
bit-
right after. So that's going to
Yeah.
be the 10th, maybe?
Yeah,
I don't have a June calendar open.
I'm trying to get my little calendar here. June.
June
So 6th is the last day, so 9th, June 9th.
the 9th. Okay, perfect. So June 9th. So all participation codes need to be submitted by June 9th. Okay. However, again, it's just best to do this while students are still in school so that users can have students finish them or take them if they've discovered one that may have been missed. Okay. Amy, this is for you because yes, there is a way to mass upload some participation codes. So when it comes to adding participation codes, an LEA level user can add them for multiple students in a single upload. You'll just need to enter all SSIDs and their corresponding participation codes into an Excel or a CSV file from the template that's downloadable from Tide. And then you'll upload the entire file into Tide in just one action. Okay. But just know this task does require strong familiarity with CSV files or working with Excel. More guidance is included in the Tide user guide if you're interested in it, okay? But just know that you might want to stick with the manual version one-on-one if you're not as familiar with CSV and Excel files, okay? So you'll upload your file with the SSIDs and their corresponding participation codes. If you've not saved the file on your device, you're going to need to go download one just like any other Tide upload file. The template upload file is pre-configured with the RISE assessments as well as the applicable participation codes. And just take some time to preview the file, but any errors in the upload are going to be flagged in a validation step, okay? A common error as seen here occurs when trying to apply a participation code to a test that a student wasn't eligible to take. So these errors will need to be fixed and then you'll need to re-upload the revised file for those changes to be reflected. Okay, checking the chat now. Does the system auto-assign or populate the absent did not test? Christine, I don't think so. Eric, can you verify that? I don't think it auto-assigns because
No.
it doesn't know to auto-assign that. You would need to go and select those ones.
Yes, nothing is auto-assigned, so it would just be assumed the student didn't test.
Thanks. I should mention here, though, that the only auto-assigned participation code is actually the 200 standard participation code. So as long as the student took the test when they were supposed to without any issues, that standard 200 participation code will be taken care of on the back end. Okay. What happens if the student doesn't complete the test before the window closed? Christine, that's when you would then have to go in and enter the participation code, whether they were absent or if it was for another reason. And again, you have until June 9th to get those in, and the window closes the 6th. So you can still be entering participation codes after. If they completed some of it, this test will force complete for them at the end. And it will generate a score based on what the student has entered. Are there any other questions about test appeals or data cleanup that we can address for you? You do not need to put in a code for force complete. No. If the student started it but just didn't finish it, it's going to force complete it. Well, Eric, would they be able to put in a code if it was force completed? Like, for example, if it was a medical emergency, could they put that in after?
As long as the student's still active in the system, you can put a code in after if you need for whatever reason. Yes.
So,
that would be something.
Christine, I would recommend if it's something like I had mentioned, like a medical emergency, a kid automatically, like immediately gets ill and is not able to finish it, doesn't come back for the rest of the year and it force completes, I would put in that medical code after it's been force completed, just so that it's coded as that. but that would again be probably more rare situations. If there are questions during the testing session itself, I would always recommend that you reach out to the RISE Help Desk. If it is tech related, they actually extend their window of availability for us during the summative window. That normally their hours of operation for us are 8 to 5 Mountain Time, but during the summative testing window, they are available to us 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is super helpful. So if at any time you have some technological issue questions that need to be addressed, feel free to reach out to them. Okay. Also, this is the information for you as far as who to contact at USBE. If you have some administration questions, you can reach out to myself, Maureen for rostering questions, Jessica for accommodations questions, Sydney McCarty for testing ethics. And if you have content specific questions, I can also connect you with our content specialists if it's needed. With that, we finished a lot earlier than I'd planned, which is great. I will definitely never complain about finishing a training early. But I'm also happy to stay on for the next while and answer any questions that you may have. But if you're good to go, feel free to log off the training and know that the training will be posted to our assessment YouTube channel in the coming days. I will share the link at AD meeting next week, as well as in the following AD memo. The slide deck will be made available in Midas probably sometime this afternoon, if not tomorrow morning, and you can go and link those get the link for the slides in a PDF form. But I'll go ahead and stay on and address any questions that you have in the chat if they are needed. But other than that, you are good to go. So let's see here. Isn't that only if they complete 6 items or less? Otherwise, it counts as standard. Cassidy, send me an email because I think our accountability specialist is looking into this right now for clarification. As long as they complete 6 questions, it will be considered standard. Oh, perfect, Eric. Thank you. As an entering health emergency code only if they completed less. Yeah, Cassidy, you can just do it if they completed less than the 6. Will the ELA test clusters look like the training test with parts A through F on the same page, or will they need to click through? Looks like it for the cluster. Perfect. Any other questions? Thank you again so much for your attendance, and thank you to my USBE and CAI friends for all of your support and help. It is always appreciated. But again, if you've got questions, don't be shy. You can drop them in the chat. If they start and they just won't finish, let it force complete if they complete 6 questions. Yeah, Christine, you can just let it force complete if they've completed 6 questions, and it will submit for scoring. And then if you're wondering about how it works for accountability, you can reach out to Brittany Broadhead, our accountability specialist. Will the ELA test also have questions where they will click through tabs, or will they all be clustered? Karen, I don't believe they're all clusters. If I remember correctly, they would maybe only see
I can respond, Elise. I can respond.
Okay, thanks, Sid. Perfect.
In ELA, the students will see one cluster and the rest will be passage-based. And then in math, they may see a cluster that's a field test item. So we're not necessarily telling students that that would be a field test, but if they see a cluster in math, it would be a field test item. We don't have clusters on the blueprint in math, but they may see one. But in ELA, all students will see one cluster.
Thanks, Sid. Will the cluster questions show up in the benchmark tests or only in the training tests?
We should have clusters in ELA and math going live February 18th. That will have some clusters available in the benchmark tests starting then. And then science already has clusters and benchmarks.
Amy, yes, ELA and writing will not be available until the fall for reporting. We don't have a date, but I can tell you fall. Any other questions? Is there a cluster currently in math? There will be students, I believe, who might see one. Sid, is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. So on the summative, some students may see, I think it's only like 25% of students that would see a cluster on the field test item instead of a group of 8 to 10 standalone questions for math. They are currently on the training tests, and then there will be clusters available for math, some benchmarks available starting February 18th.
Thanks. So that way you can expose your students to the one on the training test so that they know how to interact with it if it becomes available to them on the summative test. When it comes to USB created resources to support students with a cluster item, Sandy, I would just recommend, as I just mentioned, having them open the cluster item that's in the training test, and you can work through that with them in the training test all together. It's not a benchmark item, so it doesn't need to be kept secure. It's not an interim item or summative item. So the training ones you can work through with your students, and it's going to look just like it would look in a summative environment. Anything else? These are great questions, friends. Happy to provide any clarification we can. Clarifying question about the pause test. If students are clicking through the question tabs on a reading passage set and pause for more than 20 minutes, they can access the questions they didn't get to yet. So if they have not responded to them, Karen, they will be able to respond to them after 20 minutes. If they respond to them and like mark it for review, they would no longer be able to. No problem. Absolutely happy to help. The snowstorm is crazy for my Wasatch Front friends. Oh my gosh. I'm just baffled at what has changed in the last 2 hours. I think with that, Emily, we are good to end our recording. Again, USBE friends, NCAI friends, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And we will see you all on another day.
Yep. Talk to y'all soon.
Yep. Thank you.